So if you're recording a lecture, you cannot use the hotkeys for that, but let's go back to those polygons. There we go. But you can use these for object component, vertex mode, edge, or face, or multi-component, which is Control-Tab. And multi-component allows you just to select multiple things, faces, edges, not vertices though for some reason. Okay. But then it also has these other tools which are like Select Edge Loop tool. Sometimes when you right-click and you go to Edge and you double-click an edge, it doesn't always work. And you'll probably find that at some point that you want that to work so that you can grab that whole loop that's going around. Okay, and it could be something as simple as the direction that these vertices are facing. If I were to grab something like this and extrude it, and I extrude it, and then I just kind of make my own shape out here. Sometimes it's going to do it this time. Sometimes it won't do that. Or as I do this, you can see how it stops right here. Okay. Well, sometimes this Select Edge Loop tool kind of gives you better results, especially because you're just kind of in that tool and it automatically will grab the stuff. All right. There's also, if I go back to that, Select Edge Ring tool, which is going to do the opposite. So if I click here, you can see how I grabbed going this way around, grabbing the parallel lines instead of doing a loop that would loop around the thing. Okay. So this one's called the Edge Ring tool, and I'm not holding Shift or anything. It's just automatically just adding that to my selection. Then there's the border edge. Don't typically use that. Don't typically use that. Convert selection is another one that's kind of handy. If we have a bunch of faces selected and we say, geez, I wish I had those vertices there, you can just select and convert those to vertices. Or you can convert them back to faces. Okay? Or you can grab them and change them to edges. All right, so sometimes those are little handy little tricks that as you're trying to isolate elements, those things will come in handy. To edge loop. Okay, I don't use all of these. Typically, I'll use the one that's two vertices, two faces, or two edges most of the time. Grow and shrink selection is another cool one. If we have one face selected and we say we want to grab the next row out, instead of me going through and saying this, like that, okay, what I can do is click on one and then use Shift greater than to grow my selection, and Shift less than to shrink my selection. Okay, it comes really handy if we're doing something like this, where we're doing something at this area and I want to grab a certain ring of these. I go inside, I marquee a part of it like that, and then I can use Shift greater than to make it bigger, or Shift less than to make it smaller. Okay, so that's one that I always am using. Select contiguous or selection boundary, don't typically use. Just to show you what it does, I have this selected. I can say select selection boundary, and it'll just grab that outer ring. Okay, so that again is another thing that could save you time depending on what you're doing. If you really haven't found it on this one, just because it's kind of like, not a whole lot of modeling in this assignment. There's a lot of kind of placing objects and kind of deforming things. When you get to the hand and you get to the other parts that we're doing, you'll really find these little tricks and tips essential. Select contiguous edges. This is where I can grab an edge and go into the select contiguous edges, and basically I tell it that I want it to search for another edge. So this is going to hit, this is before we had the edge loop tool where we can just double click and grab an edge like this. We would click on an edge and we would click that and it would go out there and do it. So sometimes playing with this value, you can get different results that are more appropriate to what you want.
Is there a similar tool for faces so you can like select flat faces?
No, but we can do this where we grab one face and Shift double click. We can grab that way. It doesn't work this way because it goes like that as well. So you kind of have to pick your battles there. See ya. There's also these select using constraints, which in this case is not really going to be terribly handy, but what I can do is, let's say I wanted just random faces pulled out of this. Let me grab something better. A plane. There we go. Okay, so I'm going to grab random faces. So I'm just going to grab all the faces, and then from here I'm going to say I'm going to activate this random ratio. So now as I do my current selection, you can see how random faces get selected. And as I start playing with this value and start marqueing things, it's selecting a bunch of random faces instead of me having to go through and do that. Okay, so if I wanted to create some kind of organic type shape, this is a great way to do it, because I can create that, I can extrude, and then I can kind of pull it up and have this organic type shape in the background or whatever it is. All right. If you're doing a cityscape, you could use this as kind of like your extrusion, your starting point for where you have these buildings, and then go through and texture all the buildings to look like buildings. All right. There's also these other ones inside here for geometry and whatever else. I typically just use the random one. All right, but there's a lot of different cool things in there. So I'm going to say close and reset. So that's the select menu. Okay. Like I said, I don't use these because the right click is kind of like the newish thing where you can just right click and go to vertex or face or whatever. And then the edge loop tool, edge ring tool, these are all kind of like, whenever you need them. But that grow and shrink selection and the convert selection, I think, are essential ones to kind of keep under your belt for when you need it. So let's go to the mesh menu here. And we're going to get, like I said, more into detail in a lot of these, but I just want you to kind of see them because as we start working, it's going to be very critical that we do use those. All right, so right now I have 4 cubes. If I group them, I can move them around as one object. If I marquee them again, though, they're now individual objects. If I click on one, I can move it separately. Okay? So sometimes we don't want that to happen. Sometimes we want literally all 4 of these objects to be one object. That's where we can use combine. So if I hit combine, now they're one object. Okay? Now why would I want to do this? Well, let's pretend that I had these cubes here perfectly lined up where I want them, but then I want to start connecting these pieces together to create a new shape. So I need to combine them. Okay, that's the first step. And then I can go in here to face and click on this face, shift click that face, and then I can go under edit mesh. I'll just keep this one off to this side. And I can say bridge. And you can see how I can connect these faces here. And just using bridge to connect those. Obviously there's other ways that I could have created this as well, but this is just one instance. And one thing about polygons you'll find too is that sometimes one tool will work, sometimes that tool will not work the next time. For whatever reason, the polygons just don't like it. Today we were using the bridge tool, and it was doing this to one of the students. Okay, it was like twisting it. So then we had to come over here, which this is a new thing, this bridge offset, and then we had to fix it so that it didn't do that. All right. Sometimes like bevel will work. Sometimes interactive split will work, and sometimes it won't. All right. So that's what combine is going to do. And then what separate is going to do is, let's pretend that these things were not connected at all, not touching at all. I could then take this and separate it. So now I have those pieces that are broken apart again. So combine puts them together, separate separates them. Okay. But I can't grab faces and say separate. That doesn't work. They have to be separate objects. Okay. That's what extract is for. If I grab faces like this and I want to pull those off the surface, I can say extract. And now I just click off, go back to object mode, and now these are separate pieces. Okay. Booleans is a bad tool. We never, ever, ever, ever want to use Booleans. With the exception of 2014 on these computers, it's okay to use Booleans. Okay. And the reason for it is right here. If I go to my About Maya, this is the extension for Maya 2014 where they redid the Boolean tool. Okay. Before it was a piece of crap. You couldn't use it ever or hardly ever. But now they've redone it, so it's much better. All right. Is it? Okay. I haven't had an issue with it. I'm going to say yours is user error. All right. So here's what you can do with Booleans. And it's not, it's not good modeling practice to use a bunch of Booleans anyway. But if you are kind of in a crunch and you just need this shape, and it's not going to be, seen very closely, you can kind of get away with it. So there. All right. So I have this. I'm going to take these pieces and combine them. There we go. And delete the history. And then I'm going to take this bottom piece, shift click this piece, and say Booleans difference. And you can see what happened is it automatically just cut those shapes out of there. Okay? So Booleans is good for doing this, where it takes one shape, takes another shape, and you can do an operation between them to subtract or add or whatever. So I did difference, That's what difference does. It subtracts the first or the second shape from the first one. I can do union, which just combines them. But what's different about union is that if I go inside here, you'll see that the parts that were overlapping are gone. So if I was to create like a building and I wanted these little dome things up here, there's the little dome things. And then there's intersection, which will keep wherever they're intersecting. Okay, so wherever those two things were intersecting, it just keeps that shape. And then I could take this and delete the history, and then I could separate it, and now I have these little like disk things that I could use for whatever. Okay, so you see how all these tools are kind of working together to create these kinds of shapes. Now here's why Booleans is not a good tool to use. Let me just kind of rotate this kind of funky. And difference, there we go. Okay, so if we look at this, you can see that this point right here doesn't go anywhere. It just stops. Okay, the top face is flat. There's no big deal. Okay, but the second that I start getting anything where maybe I'm trying to move this point, Maya's going to kind of freak out because there's an edge here, but there's not an edge there. All right. So if I really wanted to use Booleans, I have to use it sparingly, and then I have to go through with this interactive split tool, and then I should connect all these points to something out here. Okay, and then let that follow along. All right, and then this will give me something that's a bit cleaner of a piece of geometry. We don't want to have triangles, but for whatever reason we needed to use Booleans, we can do that. I'm going to show you a different way we can create holes and stuff in a minute. All right, smooth we probably used before in the intro class. This literally just smooths it out. Okay, so when we hit 3, this is a smooth preview. When we hit the smooth button, this is actually smoothing it out, so that we could take a shape that was a cube and now make it look like it's rounded. And up the divisions, and there we go. Now this isn't perfectly rounded, but what you'll find is that in some cases it's more beneficial to start with a cube than it is to start with a sphere. For instance, let's go to 3 divisions. There we go. At 3 divisions on this cube that I've smoothed, I can grab these there and these here. And I'm going to hold down Control and deselect that. And then I can go to my extrude, which was up right there. And I'm going to just kind of push that in. And you can see how I can create this little Phillips head screw just very quickly using that. Now if I was to use a sphere, here's why I don't like using a sphere for stuff like this, is if you look at these faces, they're not really consistent. Okay? If I go to the top view and we grab basically the same thing, like, my eyes are getting terrible. That and this. There we go. You can see right here how this is like bowing out. Okay? So with the cube smoothed out, we got a nice little Phillips head screw. Here we don't. All right? So that just wouldn't create a nice surface. That, beautiful. And while we're talking about modeling stuff, only create what you need. I don't need the back of that. No one's ever going to see the back of it. Okay? If for some chance that someone got closer, maybe I'll take this edge here and just scale it in a little bit. There we go. Okay, so now I have a little Phillips screw right there, and I could also go and grab this right there to there, and here to here. Yep, and I'm just going to scale this flat, just because that's kind of bothering me. There we go. That's more like a Phillips head screw. All right. So that's where we could use this smooth on certain objects. Also, as we're modeling something, let's say like an ice cube, people enjoy this one. We start with a cube and we kind of smooth it out just to add divisions. We don't want it to be this smooth. Okay? We want it to have more divisions. We want to kind of soften it some, but not like this. So we can come over here to the continuity and we can scale back on the continuity. So I can pull it down to 0.2, add a couple more divisions, and now we're creating this just smoothed out cube where it's a little bit softer. Okay? And then we can do stuff like use the create or the sculpt polygon tool. Shrink it down. That down. Smooth. There we go. and I'm just kind of smoothing this out in areas that I want it to be smooth. Or I can pull it in areas I want this to be pulled out. Okay, and then I can say, okay, I like the way that looks, I'll go and smooth it again. And now I have kind of like this ice cube shape, okay, just by starting with a cube, smoothing it a little bit, sculpting it a little bit, and then smoothing it out, okay? I would never want to start with a cube, smooth it at 1,000 divisions, and then start to tweak it. It's much easier, and I get a much nicer shape by doing it the way I did it. Starting a low-res cube, a little bit of smoothing to it, sculpt it a little bit, and then doing a final smooth. Okay. Average vertices is kind of like a smooth, except it doesn't add any divisions. So if I say I have a bunch of points here, and I want this to kind of smooth out or soften the look, yes, sir.
What's the Simulating tool do, or whatever it's called?
What's what?
The Boolean or whatever.
What does it do?
Yeah, like what's like, not what it do, but like it just seems like it's a useless tool. Like when would you use it?
Sometimes you need to kind of cut something out and then add the divisions in, but typically I don't use it. I never ever use the Booleans tool. Yeah, I try everything I can to model it any other way.
What was it made for?
It was made for just kind of cutting things out.
Like Pathfinder, Illustrator,
Right.
merge shapes or cut out shapes. In other programs like Cinema, you can animate Booleans and have something cut a hole into it animated. Can't do
Right.
anything like that in Maya.
You can do it in Maya, it's just not as easy.
You gotta script some stuff,
You know, it'll
or manually do.
or manually do it. Yeah. If I take this ice cube and I take that ice cube, or I'll even do just a plane. Okay, so I have this big cube here. Okay, so I'm going to take this and difference that. Okay, so now it's cut. So then what I can do is in my outliner, here's the original pieces of geometry. When you do a lot of these tools like Booleans or combine or separate, it keeps the original geometry and then it makes a new piece. So my new piece is this Polycube 4. So I can still move Polycube 4. Ignore that. That's just a display issue. There we go. I can grab Polycube 4 and move it, and you can see how I can animate this thing kind of doing like a cutaway. Okay, so if I was to do an animation like this, or I needed to do an animation like that, that's where I would use Booleans. But for regular modeling stuff, I try to avoid it at all costs. Some people love using it. They just have to be careful with using it. In programs like Houdini, they actually have, like, when you do a Booleans, the entire node structure of everything that you're doing a Booleans on is there, and it calculates it much nicer because it's looking at the final result, and it adds divisions where it needs divisions. Maya doesn't do that.
That's what Moto does. They
Yeah.
have a Boolean tree.
Right. Right. So that's where we could use Booleans for that. Oh, I deleted my ice cube. Back to there. Okay. So if I have average vertices, I grab this and I hit average, and what it's doing is it's trying to smooth it out. So if I had a bunch of rough shapes in there, or I had, you know, just like this random point that was just, you know, like this, because it happens sometimes, I need to get this point back into where it looks nice, and I don't really remember where it looks nice, and I don't want to take the time to tweak it to there. What I can do is hit average vertices a bunch of times, and what it does is it automatically kind of finds the average position from all the other vertices surrounding it, and then I can go through and kind of, you know, tweak it if I need to. Okay, so that's what average vertices does, and that's typically what I use it for. Is when I have a bunch of stuff that's just kind of random, and I need to just kind of bring it back to home and just kind of soften it, the look of it. I don't really need to talk about transfer attributes right now. We'll get into that further later. Reduce. There's a reduce. We don't need to talk about this, except for I'll just kind of show, you know, I can reduce something and it lowers the amount of divisions on this depending on what settings I have put in here. Okay, so if I decided that I went too crazy on an amount of divisions, I could come in here and say reduce this by 14.236%. There we go. Perfect. Or reduce this by 96%. There we go. Okay. This is more handy for something like a video game, because in a video game they have this thing called level of detail, where when the character is right up against the camera, you're looking at the highest quality rendering or highest quality model of that character. And as the character dropped back to 50 yards, it's a lower res. And as you drop back to 100 yards, it's an even lower res. When you drop back to 500 yards, it's looking like that, okay? Where it's really, really blocky. And that's how video games can have so many characters and so many things going on, because they have very good control of level of detail. And then you could even paint level of detail, which I've never actually done before, because I never needed to. This next one is going to be kind of essential when you start trying to do some of these operations and it's not working. So you try to do an extrude, it doesn't work. You try to do a bevel, it doesn't work. You try to use any one of the interactive split tools, it doesn't work. And this is called cleanup. And what it does is it goes through your surface and tries to make sure that it's happy. And if it's not happy, it'll give you a message, okay? Or it'll try to fix it. So I'm just going to click on this face here, and I'm just going to reverse that face, okay? So right now it looks the exact same way. What I did is I went through and I flipped what Maya thinks is the top of it. So I'm going to turn on what are called face normals, okay? And a face normal is basically, this is the top side of the surface. That's what Maya is considering the top. So the one that I flipped, you see that doesn't have a little green sticker sticking out of it. The green stick is on the bottom, okay? Now, big deal, the green stick's on the bottom, who cares? Maya cares, all right? Now, it doesn't care on the surface. It's only when we try to do stuff that it will care. So when I go to hit cleanup, I'm going to go through here and turn on non-manifold. This is one of the things that typically you'll find has an issue. I'll say cleanup, and you'll see what happens is it's going to flip that surface, okay? It's going to go through and say, hey, this face right here is not facing the same direction as all the other faces, and it flips it and puts it back the way it should. Okay, the only thing we have to watch out for is sometimes it'll actually detach stuff and break it. It doesn't look like it did at that time. Oops, there we go. All right, so that way it kind of cleaned it up. We could also use this to say clean up four-sided faces. Now, we typically don't ever want to clean up four-sided faces. If we're working in a video game where they're using triangles, or we have a specific project for whatever reason we need triangles, we could do that, but we typically don't need to do that. All right. We can also go through, and let's just pretend that I have a thing here. All right, so I'm just adding some extra divisions here. And I'm going to say clean up faces with more than four sides. And you'll see that's going to go through and try to find anything with more than four sides and triangulate it. Okay? Or I could do non-planar faces. It's kind of like what we showed with the Booleans. If I grab this and pull it way far up, you can see that this doesn't make sense to Maya. Okay? There's no surface that really could be here because this point has nowhere to go. So again, I could say clean up non-planar faces. And it'll clean up this one just by adding a division here and a line. Okay? So Maya can do all of these kinds of things, and typically you'll kind of find these things out as you go. You'll get a little warning message down here saying, hey, you got non-manifold geometry, or you got this, or you got that, and you want to go to cleanup and clean that up. Okay? Now, this is a kind of a handy tool also, as we can triangulate stuff, and then we can quadrangulate stuff. Okay? You'll see that I can't just go back and forth. Let me turn my normals off. Polygon, fixed normals. There you go. Okay, so I can triangulate and quadrangulate. So it's basically taking my triangles off. But you'll see that it's not a perfect operation going back and forth because I have other stuff going on. Had I created just a cube, let's say, there it is, and I triangulate it and I quadrangulate it, you can see that's a pretty perfect operation. In some models that you might get from the internet, from TurboSquid, from High-End or Creative Crash or any of those websites, sometimes it will be a triangulated model. If someone modeled it in 3D Studio Max and they need to send it to Maya, it'll be a triangled model most likely. So then you have to go through and quadrangulate it because you want to work with quads. You don't want to work with triangles because triangles are a lot harder to work with. Okay? Fill hole is a handy one. Here's a hole, and you fill it. Done. That's all it does. Okay? Super handy if we had something like, here's a torus, and let's cut a hole in it right there. And we just want to kind of cap this thing off. We could just say fill hole. Now we have to be careful that it knows which hole to fill, otherwise it might fill going the other way. Okay? So we can always grab the edges, double click the edge, and say fill hole, and it'll just fill whichever hole we've selected. Okay, so we're isolating it, just kind of helping it out, and fill that hole as well too. There's a make hole tool. Never used it except for once to see what is this, and then I said that's stupid. There's a create polygon tool. Same thing. I've used it once or twice. Essentially, what it does is there's a script. Oops, I clicked on it. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the wrong one. I was thinking of a different one. The create polygon tool I've used several times. This one you can literally just kind of draw, hit enter, there's my polygon shape. So instead of me creating a plane and trying to shape the plane to create this shape, I just draw it out, okay? And then I can go through and say extrude, pull it up, and then I have that specific shape. So if you're doing a logo or you're doing something where you need a specific kind of design, you can use this. I've seen human faces be modeled by them just using the polygon tool and going along the center line, and then just extruding and pulling it back, and extruding and pulling it back, and then sculpting it from there. Okay, so the create polygon tool is a handy tool to have. The sculpt geometry tool, this is one of my favorite tools. So we click on the option box. As you get better, you don't need the option box. But it's essentially a painting tool. So I can pull stuff out of here. I can push, where's push? There it is. Push stuff in. I can pinch, there it is. Pinch stuff together. I can relax stuff. So it's kind of like average vertices. I can also smooth stuff, which pushes it in more. That's kind of like average plus some pushing in there. And then I can erase all the work that I just did. Okay, so it's a really handy tool to create stuff that's a little bit more organic, that has a little bit more detail to it. When we're doing the Gillette can, doesn't really help. When we're doing the lights, doesn't really help. But when we're doing the hand, it's going to be an immense help. Okay, when we're doing something like an organic piece and we have to make sure that these things are kind of nice and smooth, it's very handy just to be able to grab a paintbrush and just paint it and just say smooth these guys out. Or I want to pull up where the knuckles are. You can just pull up where the knuckles are just by using this little paintbrush and say pull, and just kind of pull up where the knuckles are. All right. There's a lot of options that are inside here. The main ones, if you hold down U, you can get what the operation is, but the operation is also right here. If you hold down M, that's how much you're going to move it. If you hold down B, that's the brush size. Those are the three main ones that I use when I'm using this. Okay, but there's opacity. You can choose your brush size. I deleted my ice cube. It's all based on divisions too, so I can't like go in between here and start to sculpt something because there's not enough divisions. I have to go to a point, and then it'll start pulling it up. And if I add enough divisions in here, like that, then I can create some pretty fine detail stuff. Shift I forget. There's a hotkey. I can't remember it. To turn that off, I'm going to turn the wireframe off. Alright, so you can see how I can just kind of sculpt this. I could also use this kind of to create some background environments and say, oh, that looks kind of messy. I'm going to come back with smooth. Just kind of soften some of these areas. Like that. Okay? So very quickly I can create this kind of surface that in order for me to create that without the tool would take me an incredibly long amount of time. For me to grab all these individual points and push and pull and do whatever would take an extremely long amount of time. Okay. You could also do, if you wanted to create a flag, if you didn't want to go through all the hassle of using end cloth or anything like that, you could just create a plane, add divisions to it, and use a sculpt tool just to kind of create that look to it. So I use that one a whole lot. Mirror cut, mirror geometry. We'll get more into what these are, but essentially, let me create. Okay, I spent 6 hours modeling this, and I want to flip it over to the other side because I want this to be symmetrical. So I use mesh mirror cut because I want it to cut it, and I pick the axis. It's kind of tricky, but you'll get the hang of it as we go. You pick the axis that is not present in the direction you want to go. That doesn't make sense. So I want to flip this over the X direction, okay? So I picked the one in here that doesn't have the X direction in it, which is YZ. Okay? So now it flips it. You see how we have this. It didn't really position it correctly, so let me just reset my Translate X. It does this funky thing every once in a while. If I go to wireframe, it's still there. It's just kind of hidden. So I just reassign my Lambert, which many polygon tools will do that. There we go. So now I have an exact copy on the other side. I could also use this mirroring thing and push it and get an exact duplicate kind of side to side. So if I modeled, let's say, this half of my face, I can just flip it and it'll automatically do the other side of the face. Or if I modeled, I don't know what, something where I needed it to look like this, then it'll look like that. All right. I have to delete the history, and then I can delete the plane, and then we're good. All right. So that's what that guy does. Let me delete all this other stuff. Cylinder. There we go. Mix it up with some different shapes. Keep it exciting. All right. So the next one, let's pretend again that I've kind of gone through and I've modeled this thing how I want to model this thing, like that. And then I want to flip this over. Well, I don't have the other side there, so I can't do the mirror cut. It'd probably work. Nope, it didn't. It just freaked out. If I pushed it over here to 0, I'm sure it would work. There we go. Okay, so mirror cut would work, but I have to reposition it. The other one is mirror geometry. So basically, we have the geometry already cut in half. We want to flip it over to the other side. So we use mirror geometry, and in this one, we pick the direction we want to go. We're in the positive X direction. I want to flip it into the negative X. I'm looking down here to see that. So I say negative X, mirror, and there it is. So now I have an exact copy of it, and it's attached. So if I hit 3, you can see that they are connected. Okay? It's not as simple as just taking this and duplicating it and rotating it or, scaling it this way. It's physically attaching these two pieces using combine and then using merge to merge those pieces together.
Could you use separate to separate?
I could. If I went to mesh and I said separate, now they're back to being separate. Okay. So these are all the ones under the mesh tool. Under the edit mesh, I'm going to go through. Oh, I hate when I do that. Let me change my resolution real quick. My resolution is just short enough that it doesn't show the top of that menu, so then it gets stuck in the middle of my screen.
Edit mesh, you're trying to do keep face? No.
No, I just want that menu to go away. And keep changes. And I have to close Maya because that's the second time I've done that. That's what happens when you have your resolution down so you can record your lecture.
Maybe you should use the hotbox instead.
Well, I wanted to pop it off so I could just click on it.
So that's what the toolbar is for.
There you go. Okay. It's thinking, it's thinking. There it goes. Okay. All right, so inside here, we have this one we've used several times, which is Extrude. Oops, I put it here. Which is Extrude. So I can grab this face, I can hit Extrude, and then I can pull that face out. Okay. You may have not seen it doing this, though, is that if I created a curve, like that, and I go to that face, I click that face, I shift-click the curve. Try that again. Face, curve, there we go. Extrude, wonderful. I have to add a bunch of divisions. And now that we have more divisions in here, you can see that now we're getting this thing to shape just like that. Okay? So imagine a power cable, imagine a dragon's tail or a cat's tail or a dog tail or any kind of tail. Anything this kind of shape. I can also go through and take my thickness down. Oop, not thickness, sorry. Taper down, which is over here. And now I can taper this thing to get it to be a little bit narrower. Okay? Now imagine again trying to extrude this kind of shape just by extruding it. It would be ridiculous. Okay? So understanding some of these tools are not simply just the same way that you used them before. We've used them a certain way before because that's what we needed it. But there's other things that we can do. There's even a twist inside here that we could also do.
Do the twist.
Yep, do the twist. Okay, and there's thickness, whatever that's going to do. All right. Let's go back to that and delete the history. All right, now there's a bridge, which I kind of showed before. But basically, I can grab two faces and just say bridge between these two faces. And you can see how it's automatically creating that transition between those two faces. So if I have pipes or I have whatever it is that I'm trying to connect together and make it look like they're all one piece, this is kind of a handy way to do that without having to do a whole lot of work.
What's causing it to create the shape?
The shape,
Yeah.
the direction that this one is and the direction that that one is. It's basically figuring out if these two are moving like this, how do we create a nice smooth transition into it? Okay. Now you can, if I go to, let me grab a couple other faces here, like that one and that one.
So it's kind of a planar thing. It just, you know, it stays in one plane and then kind of matches the plane of the other.
Right, like one's going this way, one's going that way. It knows that at some point it has to turn. I can do this linear, which will just kind of shoot straight across. So in this case, it's not going to try to bend and form into that. But with the smooth on, it will try to fit there. Now these guys that I created originally, they actually came with a bonus feature, which is this curve. So on the curve, I have points, and I can take those points and then manipulate those points. So we can tweak this and get the exact shape that we're looking for. Okay? And this is why you have to kind of see these tools in a different light than just kind of, we're creating a box, we're creating a desk, we're creating a chair. You have to kind of see them outside of that so you understand what their uses are. The append tool, it can be handy as well. Oops, I deleted a face. I don't really want to go to the fill hole because I want to, whatever reason. The append tool allows me to click on these edges. I click on this edge, I click on this opposite edge, I hit enter, and now it's filled in. Okay? Typically the append is for, oh, okay. So, there we go. So the append tool allows me to just kind of manually go through and fill these gaps in. Okay, so I click on one edge, click on the other, and then go back to the tool, and go back to the tool.
What are those purple shapes?
That was the next one I was going to show. If we had something a bit more complex, like let's say this here, and I wanted to just kind of fill this entire thing with one solid polygon for whatever reason. I click on here. These little purple triangles are telling me this is the direction you have to go. Okay? Just like a polygon knows this is the top and this is the bottom. Well, if I start drawing it the other way, it's going to make the bottom the top and the top the bottom. All right? So I follow the arrows. Follow the arrows. Follow the arrows. And it might be hard to see on the screen, but there's a tiny little dot that shows where my last point was, right there. I'm just following the arrows around. And it gets a little tricky when you're trying to do something like that. And then it automatically kind of filled in the last bit, so I hit enter. And now you can see that that whole face is now closed off, and I can grab this, and then I could extrude it if I needed to, and just pull it out. If for whatever reason I needed that exact shape, there it is. Okay. So that's the append tool. It's a handy tool. Again, it's one of those things where it's just like, oh, I need the append because fill hole isn't working, or I need the append because something else isn't working. Project curve on mesh. I really haven't had a use for this. I'm sure you can find some use for it. Let's say I had a circle like that. Shift click the circle and then project the curve onto it. There we go. So now we have a circle on top of this mesh, which we could then duplicate and pull off, and we could loft between them. Like I said, I really haven't found a terribly good use for it, except for like, hey, yeah, it's kind of neat. Cut faces tool, split mesh. Oh, I guess you can split the mesh with a projected curve, but again, I've never done that, so come on. There we go. So there it projected it, and then it cut it out. So now I have a perfect hole cut out right there that I could then extrude. But again, this isn't clean geometry, so I typically don't like to do stuff like this because it's kind of like more of a hack than actually creating a clean piece. But if I needed that exact shape, if you remember like the Powerball commercial where there's a big ball rolling and all these little compartments are popping out, you probably don't remember it.
It's a Powerball?
Yeah. Why is Google so slow? See what's faster. Look at that. See, it knew I was going there, and then it's just like, I'll open. There it is. Ring side. In this case, even if I have this and I extrude it and I push it in, you can still see how rough that edge is. Even right here, look at it. Like, put a little chip out of it. Probably because I didn't select it, but still. All right, it's not really smooth. So in that case, I would typically use a NURBS surface for something like that. Let's just undo that mess. Cut faces tool. This is actually kind of a cool one. Let me show the interactive split first, and then we'll get to that. Okay, so interactive split, I can literally just draw the edges that I would need. So if I'm trying to create that Powerball shape, I could just draw the pieces on here and then hit enter. Okay. Now sometimes it doesn't work like it did here because it was kind of freaking out because of the Powerball geometry stuff that it put in there. So then I have to just kind of go through and manually start trying to redraw this shape. Let's see, it's just
You gotta use the old one.
that is the old one.
No, the non-interactive one.
Oh, the hidden one. Yeah, I ain't gonna show that. All right, so sometimes it just doesn't work because of that. All right, so basically what you're doing though is you're manually clicking. Okay, the insert edge loop tool allows us just to click and it inserts a loop all the way around. But what's going to happen here, you see that it stops. Okay, it doesn't go all the way through. Well, I need it to go all the way through. I'm kind of lazy and I don't want that to, be my stopping thing. Or I use the interactive split and I went like this. And now my insert edge loop going this way is not going to go all the way around. Okay, so what can happen is I go in here, I go to my cut faces tool, and the cut faces just click and drag, and then let go, and whatever angle you clicked and drag, it automatically just cuts it up right there. So there's my edge. So you can see how I can just kind of draw and create this really messed up shape. Okay, now where this really comes in handy is in something like dynamics, where we're doing this kind of shape and then we're breaking it up. We're taking those pieces off and then deleting them. Or we're using like end cloth and going to tear it open. So we really use that for that. You could also do this where you do extract, and I'll put this at 0.01. Okay. And then now as I cut, it's kind of hard to see, but it's splitting it. I'll make it even more obvious. 0.1, 0.1, 0.1. There you go. So you can see how it's cutting it and popping it off. Okay, and then I can go back and go to separate. And now I'll have all these kind of cool like chunk pieces. Okay, and I can also take those chunky pieces. Let me deselect all this other stuff. And I can extrude it. Holy cow. Did not like that.
Can you explode it?
You could explode it, yes. Yes, there's a Maya shatter under the dynamics menu. There's a shatter tool, and basically what it does, it kind of goes through and creates these little jagged shapes. You have no control over it. Here, at least you have some control over the outcome. Let me just grab these pieces and extrude. Doesn't want to extrude correctly. Oh, because I keep grabbing this circle, that's why. There we go. And it's extruding it along the path. So there we go. So now that I pulled that off, you see how I have this like little shard of something. If I'm creating a scene, like one of our scenes is the street corner, I'm trying to do something demolition-y or like post-apocalyptic, here's a bunch of shards of glass I can just kind of scatter along the ground. or here's a bunch of broken things I could just kind of scatter around just to give my scene a little bit more interest, okay? So you can take like a glass bottle that you modeled, slice it up with the cut tool real quick, and then just put the pieces on the ground, and it'll look pretty neat.
That gives you the actual volume
Right.
of particles on the ground as to the actual item would have been.
Mm-hmm. Right, you're getting the exact same shape. It's not like you have to fake it at all. Insert edge loop, okay. So insert edge loop we went over, interactive split we went over. The insert edge loop I'm going to show just one extra little tidbit here, which is this multiple edge loops. So instead of me going and saying, I want one here, 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 and here, I could say multiple, 5, and click once, and it automatically drops them all in evenly spaced. Okay, so if I need something like that, perfect. There it is. Equal distance from edge. This is something me and John were talking about one time. As I do this, not this one though, let me reset that. As I go to the offset edge loop, there we go. This is going to, as I click here, oops, I'm in the right tool. As I click here, you can see where it's putting these things, where it's trying to keep, wrong way, there we go. It's trying to keep a relative distance between these two, okay? So if I had something like this, where there's a little distance here and a big distance there, you can see how these are not going to be evenly spaced, okay? So under the offset tool, I can say equal distance. And now it's equally going to space those two apart. It's not going to let it go any further than that. Okay, so offset is kind of cool because it allows you just to add 2 of them pretty quickly. Okay, add divisions, just adding divisions. There you go. For whatever reason you need divisions, there they are. Slide edge tool, don't use terribly too often. If you've used it before, you might think it's kind of cool. I'll just show it. I grab an edge, like so, and then I can use my middle mouse button to slide this edge along the other edges. Okay, so basically it's not moving it up or down, left and right, it's just sliding it along the edges. I use this as instead of that. I'll grab the vertex, I'll hold down C, and I'll just middle mouse button drag along this edge to slide that point. Okay, so I've used that before. Don't need to worry about these, don't really need to worry about those. Poke face, let me go to a new shape, plane. There we go. Alright, so I'm going to grab this face, poke face, and now we have this poked face here. We can pull it up, whatever. What's cool about this that we can do is if we go through this and then go to our interactive split tool like that, and then we go to our cut faces tool. Oops, top. Oops, let me turn off that splitting. I don't want that. Okay, something like this. You can see how I can then take this and start to create this rounded shape that I could then grab these and extrude and push it down. Okay, and that's much cleaner of a surface than using something like Booleans. Okay, so poke face, add divisions, there you go. Wedge face. Okay, I have this face, and I have this edge. Come on. 2014 kind of changed some things. Multi, there. I have to go to this multi thing, and then wedge face. And then it'll do this like little, I call it a vent. And I can extrude. There you go. And we're creating these little vent pieces here that we could then animate a camera through.
Does the axis have to be connected to it?
Yes. So we're clicking this. That's a good question, actually. Let me see. This, and then that. Yeah, it wouldn't work. Okay. So I was doing this and then that, and then just rotating it around that thing. Okay. Duplicate face. Typically, this is something we'll do more when we get to the hand. But let's say we have this area. We want to work on this area. We can duplicate it. Now we have a second piece. that we can work on, and then we could use it for whatever. Or we could say, I like the way this looks, I want to duplicate it here, and then duplicate it here, and then have 50 of these things kind of going along, you know, like a bowling alley or something. That's what it looks like. Okay. You could also do this for duplicate face. You can duplicate, scoot this over, and then delete these. And that's kind of like a ghetto way to duplicate the face, but it works. Okay, same exact thing, just a lot easier, kind of more straightforward. Detach components, merge. Merge is an important one. If I zoom in here to this piece and I go to vertices, right here at the center, you can see that I have this like little triangle of vertices where there's a bunch of things kind of clustered. When I did the cut face, I wasn't exactly right on that mark, so it's a little bit off, so I have basically a whole bunch of points here. That's where I can use this merge to center. It takes all those points, pops them together, and now they're connected. Okay. Over here too, if I click on one of these points, let me click off, click on. Okay, those are connected. Let's see, that's connected, that's connected. All right, so these are all connected here, so those are good. But let's pretend that I wanted to merge these guys together here. Okay, so I can grab these 2 points and say merge, and it'll pop those 2 together. Okay. Now I like this other tool better. This is a new one. See my merge vertex tool, which allows me just to click on the point and drag it to where I want it to merge. That way I have a little bit more control over where it's merging. Come on. Undo that one. There we go. Okay, so I just kind of pull those back a little bit so I have a little bit more control. Merge edge tool, never used, never needed to. Chamfer vertex, this is another one you could use to kind of create a hole. You just chamfer it. Oops, not that. You click the vertex and chamfer it. And now you have the start of that hole. Then you can add more divisions to it, and you can extrude it. And push it in, and there you go. Okay? So stuff like this we can use for creating eyes and creating, you know, different kinds of shapes like that. Cavities and openings. Pretty quickly without having to go through and do a Booleans on it. And then the last couple that I'm going to show, this isn't a super important one, is deleting. We can't simply just go through and hit the delete key on any edge. Okay, so make a mental note that you cannot do that. Okay, because what's happening here is as I'm deleting these, you'll see that as I click on one of these edges, it's not highlighting the whole edge. It's highlighting a piece of the edge. All right, and the reason for that is that when I delete edge with the delete key, it doesn't delete the vertices. It keeps these vertices kind of sticking around. All right, so anytime we delete an edge, we want to use the delete edge vertex or control delete. And now you see that the vertices are gone. This edge is now happy. These are not happy. These are sad. So we will delete all of those. And the same thing here. This is an easy way to kind of screw up your whole scene just by not doing this and then having to go back and do it when you have smoothed the surface out a couple times. We have Bevel, which is a nice one. It allows us just to kind of add some divisions to this. Okay, just to kind of smooth out the look of it. Just like I said before, sometimes the polygon tools will just kind of hide your surface. We just have to reassign the material. Okay, so now we have a nice little rounding there. You can do it on edges or you can do it on faces. When you do a bevel, try to do all of them at the same time because it just makes things a little bit happier. Okay, here it's not too big of an issue. Sometimes you'll run into things where you get these really funky things happening that just don't want to play nicely like that. Yes, sir.
Let's say you wanted to, like, see where you did the, right there, the curve, whatever?
Here?
Yeah, what if you want to add more, like, make it smoother around that?
If I wanted to make it smoother, I'm kind of past the point of being able to do that. Okay, because that happened so long ago, I can't do that. But if I created a new one, let's say, let me go to multi, click, there you go.
You can't insert additional lines?
You can insert them, but they're going to be in the middle. They're not going to be like continuing the roundness. I'll show you after this one. So let's go to wedge. There we go. And then in my wedge settings over here, I can just take my divisions up. Okay, so I have to know that right off the bat that I want to do that. On this, if I go and do my insert edge loop, okay, first it's only going to put them there, but you see how it's still keeping it flat. I'd still have to go back in and then tweak this afterwards. Okay, just to make sure that's nice and round. Okay, or I could hit 3, and if my surface is right, I could smooth it out, but obviously we're getting some funky stuff because we don't really have enough divisions going the other way, and so we get this weird look. So I'm just dropping a bevel here, dropping a bevel there. There we go. So now I've created a nice round surface here and not had too much distortion right there. Okay, here's another thing. It's kind of like a weird little edge right here that we're getting from that bevel. And then going this way, I'm just not going to be able to get a good bevel going that way. Yeah, it's just kind of a funky little bevel. All right, so you want to do any kind of beveling all at once. Here's another kind of simpler example. I click this edge. I hit bevel. Let me take my settings down. 0.1. I click this edge and hit bevel, and you see that's the same setting. That's 0.1. I click this edge and hit bevel. That's 0.1. Where if I were to just grab all of these at the same time and hit bevel, I get a nice bevel that continues all the way around. Okay, so just be careful with that bevel tool that you are just.
Why doesn't it make them even if you do them individually?
Because this is now a new surface. Because now it's trying to calculate how is this bevel connecting to this edge.
Relative, not absolute.
Right. Like here, it's saying, okay, it's going to this point to that point. Well, 0.1 from this area is going to be there. And I could do absolute here, but now it's getting this funky thing because this other side isn't working correctly. Okay, so it's just a good idea to do them at the same time. This is kind of a neat thing. If I hit 3, this smooths out. Let me just grab a cube. There you go. Hit 3, this smooths out. I can grab a vertex, or I can go to the crease tool and just grab this vertice and middle mouse button and drag the crease value up, so that when I hit 3, you can see how it's like tightening that. So remember, 3 is kind of like your smooth preview. So I can take this and tighten up some of these areas here. Edge. There we go. Tighten up some of these areas here just to give me something without still a lot of geometry. I haven't adjusted any of the points on this except just to say that these are supposed to be hard edges, not soft edges.
Edge creasing isn't something that translates well across packages, is it?
No, it is not. No. This is something that typically, yeah, you'd want to stay within Maya to do. And I've never really used the crease tool except to kind of show it and then, you know, done it that way. If I really wanted this kind of shape, I would just put the geometry in. A lot of these tools come from a time when polygons were so slow that you had to use stuff like the crease tool, and you had to use like these little hacky tricks to get things to work correctly. Another cool thing is the modeling toolkit. This is the last thing I'm going to show today. This allows you just to, come on, do a lot of your tools that you're using. So create a polygon cube, click the face. Without having this other edit mesh up, I can just use the toolkit. So I can say extrude this, and click and drag, and there it is. And then click this face, extrude. And it pulls it out the same amount that that one was pulled out, and then I can go from there. There's also some other stuff in here with how you select things. There's a whole bunch of stuff. I recommend watching the video on it. I'm not going to be able to cover every single thing that's in here. But it's really cool, the modeling toolkit. Basically, you can have quadrants set up so that if you grab these faces, then these faces and these faces are kind of like all selecting at the same time. It's pretty cool. Okay, so there's lots of other stuff that we can go over. Today I'm not going to do it. We'll get more into these as we get in the assignments, but I wanted just to kind of cover some of this stuff just so you understood just the basics of some of these tools, so that when you're going in here and you're kind of playing around, it makes more sense. The other thing that these computers have, which is kind of neat, is XGen. If you've never seen what XGen is, this is a plugin for Maya 2014 extension release. And I'm just going to jump to this part here. And by jump, I meant slowly get there. Come on. Alright, so what XGen does, there it goes, he's going to take this tree that he's modeled, and he wants to have a whole clustering of trees. So he wants to take this tree, make a bunch of trees in this landscape here. So he's going to use XGen, and I can just jump to that area also. And quicker just to watch the whole thing. And you'll see how he's going to populate this entire area with this tree. Now, big deal, he's taking this tree and putting it all over the place. We could do the same thing with duplicating it. Well, what XGen allows you to do is manipulate it after the fact, meaning that I can take this, duplicate it 17,000 times, and then I can say, okay, well, I want to take that tree model that I have, and I want to scale it randomly throughout this entire thing. So tree number 1 is 6 feet tall. Tree number 2 is 4 feet tall. Tree number 3 is 150 feet tall, or whatever your settings are. You can also control the rotation. You can also control the angle of it. So now you're dealing with something that's looking more realistic because you don't have this cookie cutter tree all over the place. So it's definitely something that when we do the environment stuff, I recommend you look at, because it's definitely something very, very cool that can kind of help your scene out. And here he's kind of saying, okay, well, now I need 100 more trees, and you hit a button and 100 more trees there. You can also use it for hair, which is what he's showing here.
So we wouldn't have XGen at home?
You probably don't have XGen at home.